But I think it's important, Clay, for us to set this table to know where we are versus where we were. The promises that were made to us as the American people by the folks who are in charge, and how rapidly all of this has changed, how rapidly we're in a very different place. I mean, this is a montage, which I think will speak very well to how what they used to say we are supposed to forget, what they used to claim they agreed with us on when it comes to vaccine mandates, when it comes to vaccine passports, masking once again, all this stuff that we're seeing, your kids having to get the vax. Here's the Biden administration over time, over the last year or so.
We cannot require someone to be vaccinated. That's just not what we can do.
You don't want to mandate and try and force anyone to take a vaccine. We've never done that.
The right of women to make decisions about their own bodies is not negotiable.
Americans' privacy and rights should be protected.
It is a matter of privacy to know who is or who isn't.
We don't want to be mandating from the federal government to the general population. It would be unenforceable and not appropriate.
We're not counting on vaccine mandates at all. That is going to be locally driven and not federally driven.
When people are able to make choices without government interference for themselves in terms of their well-being, we are a stronger society.
I don't see it on a national level merely because of all the situations you have upon encroaching upon persons' freedom to make their own choice of their own health.
No, I don't think it should be mandatory. I wouldn't demand to be mandatory.
Clay, what happened to all those Democrats? Those are the most powerful Democrats in the country. Where did they go?
It's such a fascinating situation to analyze here, Buck. Because, first of all, they have now, that entire roster is all lies, right? And for those of you out there who may not have been able to hear perfectly, Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, Dr. Fauci, Rochelle Walensky, CDC director, and also Kamala Harris. All of those people saying that there will not be federal vaccine mandates. And so when you sit back and you try to analyze this from a purely political perspective, because I think, are you with me, Buck, that we can no longer talk about the science at all? This has been straight politics for a long time because the science has, there are so many different dueling perspectives on scientists. And I saw this data point, which is so frustrating. If we were just focusing on science, we would be focused on the data so much more. Buck, I don't know if you saw this, but they actually do regular blood testing in England to see what percentage of people either have been exposed through natural immunity or have gotten the vaccine. England's up to 98% exposure to COVID in their most recent blood test, right? What are we in the United States? Probably something similar, but we don't have that data. And if we had that data, what you would have is a reasonable way to analyze what decisions are being made. And so, as long as Democrats can make you believe that there is a pandemic afoot and that there needs to be emergency activities undertaken, then it's easier to encroach and expand upon their power, even though they have a minuscule majority right now in the House and in the Senate and in the presidency as well. And so what stands out to me here is how rapidly we have moved from the science and actually what the laws of this country represent, what your constitutional rights are, to it doesn't matter, we will take as much power as we possibly can. The hypocrisy is jarring, it is staggering, and what is still distressing to me is how many people in this country are just sheep, Buck. They don't even stand up. They just say bah and walk in whichever direction they're pointed.
Protecting the vaccinated, Clay, is a thing you hear a lot now. Protecting the vaccinated from COVID.
Yes.
This was on Fox this morning on the website, and people have been raising this. And I keep saying the most neurotic and hysterical individuals you'll come across in America today when it comes to all things COVID restriction and lockdown are not seniors. I mean, seniors at this point, they've either gotten the shot and they know that they've done their thing.
93% 65 and up shot.
Or they've made a very clear decision, by the way, one that I disagree with, and so I think they have a right to make it,
yes.
But I disagree with it insofar as my own parents, who I love more than anything in the world, I know you feel the same way.
Same thing for me.
I said, as soon as my dad stood out for hours in Staten Island, the freezing cold outside, because you had to social distance in the line as if that was doing anything outdoors, to get the shot, right? I mean, this, and I was encouraging them at the time to do this. The problem is we have a society of people who are 20 to 40, 20 to 50, who are Democrats who worship at the altar of Fauciism, and they're neurotic and terrified of COVID. And so because they won't go back to normal, they pretend they're so concerned about, all the seniors and all the death from COVID. We all have to basically cater to their neuroses all the time. And this is why I see 20-year-olds, I see 30-year-olds walking around New York City still outside with masks on. Not everybody, but you see it commonly enough that you wonder, what is wrong with these people? What is it going to take, Clay? We're never going to be at COVID zero. That is a fantasy that will never exist.
And I think it's important, as you said, that we both told our parents, you look at the age range of danger in this country, it's stratified by age. I pulled this today because the CDC data is out there, Buck, on what danger you have of dying. Under 18 years old, there have been 412 COVID deaths since this started. That is 0.001% of total cases. Think about the amount of time we have spent arguing about whether kids should be in masks and about the danger, as CNN constantly puts it on their television and MSNBC, to kids. Under 18, Buck. 412 kids nationwide have died with COVID. By the way, unfortunately, most of those 412 had massively significant health restrictions. Way more kids have been murdered. Way more kids have drowned. Way more kids have died in car accidents. Way more kids have died of the seasonal flu. All of those things under 18.
And yet, Clay, as you know, the primary push right now from the Fauciites is to make your kids get the shot. And as young as possible, they want them to get them as young as possible. Go ahead.
What the FDA said recently was really an affirmation of what you and I had recently talked about, which is that getting a vaccine for kids for COVID-19 remains the FDA's top priority. They are ready as soon as the companies finish their trials and get the data to them to process that quickly, to review it and make sure our kids have a vaccine that is both safe and effective.
I mean, a reasonable health policy when it comes to children would be effectively let them live their lives completely normally. Let them get COVID and their very robust, young, adaptable immune systems knock it out quite quickly. And then you have people who have natural immunity, and then we're done with all this nonsense. But instead, we have kids that are breathing through masks and separated by plexiglass, which this is the thing, Clay, they're making us do things that we all know are stupid. It reminds me of when they used to tell you to turn off your Kindle on the airplane. Remember that? There was a time when you couldn't have your Kindle because of the electric interference or something.
Oh, yeah.
And we all did this knowing, and the airline attendants, unfortunately, some of them are great. If you're listening, I'm sure you're a freedom-loving airline attendant. A lot of them are like Siberian prison guards in the air, and they love doing this stuff. They're horrible about the masking thing, and they would tell you to shut off your... No human being actually believed that my Kindle being on or off. Because, Clay, if it could cause interference, people forget to turn it off all the time. I don't want to get too deep into the airline thing. It's just to say they're making us do things we all know are stupid, and they get angry when you won't do the stupid things.
Well, and I think we need to keep talking about the kids requirement and the fact that there are many countries that are coming out with the opposite recommendations of the United States. For instance, England, where 98% of the people, as I said earlier, have already been exposed to COVID. England is not requiring masks in schools, and they're also not requiring kids be vaccinated. My kids are not going to get vaccinated based on looking at the data. That's not because I'm trying to kill somebody's grandma. It's because there's no benefit statistically to getting my kids vaccinated for COVID and potentially creating more of a risk to them from COVID. Also, by the way, we haven't gotten them antibody tested, but since my wife and I have both had COVID, we feel pretty good that they've probably had COVID as well and been exposed to it. And because, fortunately, kids have almost no reaction to COVID on the general level, it doesn't impact them. most kids, I think, in this country have been exposed to COVID already.
I would love to see the serological
data
on this. And I think, Clay, I think the government doesn't honestly want to get too many answers. New York City in June of 2020, folks, had a 20% serological positive blood test that showed
That's right.
exposure to COVID and or antibodies. That was in June of 2020. No one can convince me it's not at least 60, 70% of the city that's been in contact with COVID in a way that shows up in their blood. It's probably more than that.